Good evening and welcome to Trinity College. My name's Ken Hinchcliffe and I've got the privilege of being the Warden and CEO of the college. For its 150 years, the college has stood on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge elders past and present, and importantly, individuals who are emerging leaders and who will be future elders. We acknowledge that this land was never ceded and that the college has an imperative to work towards reconciliation with the First Peoples of this land. We do so through the college's commitment to enabling and facilitating access to and success in higher education for Australian First Peoples. The college recognises that success in higher education alone is not sufficient to achieve reconciliation and that wider societal change is needed. The college therefore endorses the Uluru Statement from the Heart and hosts events, and will be hosting more of them, such as this one, that foster discussion and promote a broader understanding of this important topic. Trinity College, as an Anglican institution, welcomes people of any faith and none in each of our three divisions. It is in this spirit that we welcome you to the college this evening for an important discussion on the moral case for the voice. As is well articulated in the book we're going to be talking about this evening, Statements from the Soul, which is edited by Shireen and Damien Freeman. So I'm delighted to welcome our panellists, all of whom have contributed material to this book. And these are Archbishop Peter A. Comensoli, the Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne; Fiona Jose, the Chief Executive Officer of the Cape York Partnership. Fiona is also a member of the National Museum of Australia Council and chair of the Indigenous Reference Group. Bhikkhu Sujato is a Theravada Buddhist monk ordained in the Thai forest lineage. A leading scholar of Buddhism, he has translated the entire corpus of early Buddhist discourses from Pali. He leads Sutta Central, a project facilitating the study of Buddhist texts from comparative and historical perspectives. And Shireen is co-editor of Statements from the Soul, the moral case for the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and is an author and editor of numerous other texts, including Radical Heart, which was also launched in this venue, which documents her journey through the process that saw the creation of the Uluru Statement. She is director of the Radical Centre Reform Lab and senior lecturer at Macquarie Law School, and is also an academic fellow of Trinity College. And we're delighted to have as our moderator this evening ABC's RN Breakfast announcer, Patricia Karvelas. So thank you. So I'd now invite Patricia and the panel to take their seats, and we'll start the evening. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming along. I too want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land where we are meeting tonight, and also thank everyone for coming along to have what I think is an important discussion at clearly an important point in time. I want to begin by bringing Shireen in as the co-editor of this book. Shireen, I've read your foreword and lots of your contributions on these issues, and you say that at the end of the day, and I'm quoting directly from this, that this is a moral choice. Explain why you're framing it in that way.
Thanks, Patricia. Look, I think that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Like, behind the really noisy and I think quite partisan debate that we're now in the midst of about, detail or no detail, is there enough, how much do you need, this legal interpretation versus that legal interpretation. When you dig down behind all the debate around the very esoteric edges of this proposal, I really do think this boils down to a moral question about who we are as a country and what we want to do about our relationship with Indigenous peoples going into the future. And I really felt, and that, the book was obviously a long time in the making. So I've been feeling for a while that the moral imperative was getting a bit lost in the debate about drafting, in the debate about legislative design, that it is really important that in this conversation we remember why are we even talking about this, Well, we're talking about this because John Howard in 2007 put the issue of Indigenous constitutional recognition on the table, and it's been on the table since then. And ever since the British ships arrived, and long before, there's a Muslim author, Wessam Chakawi, who reminds us in his essay that actually the British weren't the first here after Indigenous people. It was actually Muslim traders from Indonesia in the 1500s. But this issue has been on the table unresolved since then. Like, what's the fair place for Indigenous people in this country who were left out of the constitution that we formed in 1901? When are we going to resolve this? The other reason is multicultural Australians and multi-faith Australians. Sometimes I think some of us feel like we don't have a voice, and we don't have a chance to participate in these discussions. But I think there is so much enthusiasm in multicultural and multi-faith Australia for this cause, and that's part of the reason we wanted to draw this book together.
Archbishop Peter, in your essay, you talk about the Uluru Statement, which has been offered as a gift, and it certainly was offered that way after the Uluru Statement in 2017. You write, and I'm quoting from the essay, "A gift, however, only has value if there is a receiver who welcomes it openly and humbly." Is it your sense that Australia is showing an openness and a humbleness to this project this year?
Thanks first, Patricia, and just if I can acknowledge also our brothers and sisters of the Wurundjeri people in the Kulin Nation here amongst us, particularly if there are some amongst us here tonight. You're right, a gift can only be a gift it's received. If you'd asked me this question perhaps as recently as, say, 6 months ago, I would have thought perhaps a stronger sense of reception than maybe at the moment. And I think your own point, Shireen, around the politics of all of this becoming quite significant in the way that people are able to receive what is being considered, and in that reception seeing it as a gift that is something good. A gift is only a gift if it is a good for the one to receive. And a gift that is good has to be given in that way as well. So particularly coming out of the Uluru Statement, the statement from the heart, and what led to the statement, that sense of offering something from amongst the First Peoples of Australia after consideration, and giving that as something to be considered and received, I think is a tremendously important thing to be considering. And it would be a shame if we lost sight of that in the processes of the political debate and the legal considerations. And so on.
I just want to follow up with you. You are a senior Catholic in Australia. You've really lent into this, and your essay really calls on Catholics to consider this and the gift that it is. Why do you think it's important for leaders of faith like yourself to be bringing their own capital into this and really involving themselves into something which, we like it or not, is being discussed so much in the political realm?
I'll speak just for myself in this regard.
Yeah.
For me, there's the imperative of looking to the good of each person and the good of our peoples. And so I frame this sense of what is being offered as in that context, so that how do I then stand before someone else who says, here, I stand before you offering as something that would be for the good of peoples. Why would I not then look towards seeing how I can respond to that myself?
Fiona, you've spent, I know, a lot of your time devoted to this issue. Your own lived experience, the political work you do, of course, or the work you do in Cape York. But I want to hear from you. what are your concerns around what's being lost at the moment as the focus has turned to the, capital P politics and all of sometimes the ugliness around that debate?
Yeah, thanks for that, Yalada. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are having this conversation today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And as PK have said, I bring greetings from Cape York. To flow on a bit, the theme is I sit here as a First Nations woman, child, daughter, and what I would want to remind people is that actually Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, First Nations people across this country have gone through a long process having real hard dialogues amongst ourselves over a really long time. And the gift to the rest of the country is what you read in the Uluru Statement from the heart. And can I tell you genuinely, the thinking, the warmth, the heart, the tears, the generosity of that the process was through our own hurt and our own histories and our own struggles that's been part of that. And it was a place of, yet again, my people offering out the hand to say, we want this whole country to be great and to be better, but we have a rightful place here. And we want that acknowledged and we want that recognition so that we can set a new foundation to be better going forward. We want recognition in the Constitution of First Nations people through a voice to Parliament. And I just remind everyone that that was the consensus of First Nations people to that magnitude that's never been had before. That doesn't mean we all agree on every nitty thing. It doesn't mean there wasn't compromise. It doesn't mean there wasn't heartache. It doesn't mean some of us are still probably a bit jilted that it's not enough. We would say it's a really modest ask. And I would just remind everyone that it was genuine. I was part of that process and I'm there. And I guess personally, because my children can't be taking on the mantle from me, there's lots of things we're really proud of that we hand down generation to generation. But for my people, this stuff, this heavy burden, and for the country, we have to stop it. And we have to move forward together, all nations, all people, all voices. And that's what this is about.
Sujato, I really enjoyed your essay. I really want to hear from you again, similar question to what I asked the Archbishop about your own, as a faith leader, why this is something that you've chosen to lean into.
Thank you. I also enjoyed my essay. I thought it was really... so I'm glad that you did.
I can't wait till you play your guitar later. That's what I'm waiting for.
Unlikely, but we'll see. So I also just joined with the other panellists in acknowledging the Indigenous owners of the land. I'm afraid I don't know the name of the people, the nation. Wadjuri country, okay. And I'm from Barramadigal country, so... All right, so why do we lean into this as faith leaders? I think... a few years ago, I led a small group of meditators to do a retreat out in the desert, and we were staying as guests on Pitjantjatjara land. And, that whole thing you're saying about that offering of a gift and that sense of graciousness about it, to me, is so important. When we went there, small little community, and we were sleeping on, just on the, on the ground, and it was very simple. Everything was very nice. They had a shed, and in the shed they had painting materials. And we have the Indigenous art, and everybody knows about this. We know that there's been all these things with appropriation of art and commercialization and all of these kinds of things. And the response of the people in the community was to say, here, make your own dreaming, make your own art. And it was such a nice thing because on the retreat, people took that opportunity to feel that inspiration. And so to me, that's that sign of that generosity and that hospitality. And it gave a meaning to what we were doing that enriched everything that was happening for the people that were there. So for me, as a Buddhist and as an Australian, I always want to live in a place that is better for everybody. The Buddha constantly talked about this phrase we find in the Buddhist teachings, sabbe sata, all beings. Not even just all human beings, right? All beings. Sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings be happy. And so we live in a country, Australia, which is pretty good for most people most of the time. You know? We're pretty happy, we're pretty safe, all of those kinds of things. This is a time when we can also do better. And we're not like some countries which treat their constitution as some sacred document. We have a constitution. I'm no lawyer, and lawyers here can please correct me if I'm wrong, but the constitution isn't great. I mean, it's okay. It's a notably imperfect document. But we can do better, and we can be a better nation. And there's nothing sacred that we have to rewrite here, but we can say, let's actually rectify some of the problems we made then. Let's do better, and let's be better as people and better as a nation.
Shireen, I want to pick up on something you said earlier, because this is obviously a multi-faith essays, but, really tries to capture multicultural Australia too, as you were saying. And you say these essays demonstrate that the passion that many migrants and descendants of migrants feel for the cause of reconciliation. But it strikes me that this will perhaps also be contested in some migrant areas by the No campaign. And I've heard this from some individuals who've said, well, look, how about our group? And that's the story of multiculturalism. There is so much diversity in this country. Why pick out this group? I know that might be an obvious answer, but I think it really needs answering. And I'm wondering if I can put it to you. Do you think that is something that will happen? Because you're very optimistic about the response you think Migrant Australia will give to this referendum.
Well, look at how it played out a few weeks ago. The No case sort of tried to co-opt migrant communities to their cause and tried to play on that sentiment that you are talking about, Patricia, trying to say, look, don't we all deserve to be recognised? And the No case put forward this argument that we should have a symbolic preamble that recognises migrants as well, hoping that they could sort of entice
Thank you. Hoping that they could sort of entice migrant and multicultural communities over to the No side. Well, I have to say, the No case got slapped down pretty damn hard by the leaders of multicultural communities. It was quite a pleasure for me to watch, I have to say, because one by one, first of all, the CEO of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils Australia, Feka Mohammed, came out and said, what are you talking about? We migrants never asked for constitutional recognition in the preamble, What an absolute joke. In fact, he said this is offensive, he said, and you're treating us like we're stupid, or, you're insulting our intelligence. And then came a woman from the Asian business community who said, that we all understand, again, migrants are in a different category. We understand that Indigenous people have been here for thousands of years and were excluded from the constitutional arrangements that were negotiated in 1901. Migrants have a different relationship with the Australian state. So I think, in answer to your question, I really do think most Australians do understand that historically, legally, politically, Indigenous people carry a special historical connection with this country that deserves to be recognised. It's just, I think, my experience talking to people is that many migrants and their descendants, and I'm of Indian and Fijian Indian background, many of us came here or had parents or grandparents who came here a while ago with very little, and we came here and worked really hard and many of us achieved prosperity. We struggled. We maybe sometimes experienced discrimination, and there's one essay in the book that talks about that. But by and large, this amazing country has been really good to us, you know, and we've been able to achieve a lot of prosperity and we've had access to a lot of opportunity. But I think most migrants know the history, and we know deep down that Indigenous people, by and large, have not experienced the same access to opportunity that we have experienced. We know that deep in our bones. And coming from backgrounds where often countries that share a history of colonisation, we have a lot of empathy for the modest form of recognition that Indigenous people are asking for here. I mean, then, you know, think about it. All the history, the heartache, the bloodshed that is in Australia's past, and what are Indigenous people asking for? They came to us, as Fiona said, with hands outstretched and open hearts, and have just asked for a guaranteed advisory voice in their own affairs. So an advisory voice when Parliament and government make laws and policies about Indigenous affairs. Not a veto, just a voice. In the grand scheme of things, that is pretty modest. So my experience has been that when migrant communities understand what's being asked, there is just so much support. I would even say passion. You know, there's passion for this cause, and I think that comes through really strongly in the essays.
I just want to let everyone know that very soon I will open it up to questions from the floor. So if you want to ask a better question than I can come up with, which I know you're all thinking, yeah, I can come up with a better question than her. Try me. But I am going to open it up in a minute. Archbishop Peter, you write that Catholic Christians are not meant to be, and I found this so interesting, and I'm going to quote, not meant to be passive witnesses to the unfolding history around them, but to carry a flame of divine self emptying into our local context, wherever they may be, and to transform them by the meeting of God's heart with each human heart we encounter.
I actually said that, did I?
You did. You did. Good, right?
Excellent.
So tell me, the idea of not being passive but active in your community is obviously what you're talking about here. What does that mean for Catholics in Australia? Do you want to see Catholics active on this issue and engaged on this issue? And why do you think that's important?
The simple answer is yes. Can I go back a little bit about how we get to that yes, though?
Yep.
Back in 1986, very long time ago now, Pope John Paul II came to Australia, standing in the middle of Alice Springs, first papal visit to that part of the world amongst the Indigenous people of Australia. And he said there something that has struck me rather significantly. He said to the Aboriginal people there that day, "You are part of Australia and Australia is part of you." There's a word that may have been in there for other people that's not there, and it's the word a part. His description of the first peoples of Australia as part of Australia, not a part of Australia, and Australia being part of them, deeply humanising words, and seeing that this society somehow, as we are as Australians, cannot be Australia without them. We are not Australia without our first peoples. So to bring that understanding of our human dignity, a dignity that we all receive from God in Christ, in the Creator, but live it out in community, for all of us to take that up then becomes something that we, I think, are required to do. Now, I'm not putting that down. Therefore, this particular set of wording of a constitutional change, that debate still needs to be happening and so on. But that there should be a way in which the part of Australia that is our Indigenous people are present in the reality of Australia is very important.
Thank you. Fiona, this entire book, all of the essays, frame this as a moral question. That's what we began the conversation with. I've spoken to many politicians who really reject that idea, that it be a moral question, or that there be an implication that to not agree with this proposal is immoral, and or that it sort of suggests any sort of malice or bad intention or motive from people who don't support it. And they're troubled by the idea that it is being framed, not specifically about your book, but the broader thing that, that if you don't want to agree with this, that you somehow don't support Aboriginal people or you don't support the moral cause. What's your response to that?
The one for public consumption.
Oh, look, we can have both versions.
Look, I'm having lots of conversations, right? Because you have to, and you have to have conversations with people who think differently to you, that are different to you, because it's only having those conversations. Because what we're asking of Australia is to listen to our voice. And I think what I'd say to that around the moral, and I have said to those leaders, right, political leaders, is I understand why you might say that. And that's because you don't know what it's like for government to control your life, to make decisions for you. And that is the simple truth, right? My communities and that might be the case for a lot of you, to say, why is this such a big deal? Because in predominantly First Nations people's lives, government make policy decisions, funding decisions. They are the ones providing solutions to our complex needs, but they don't have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friend or a neighbour or somebody in their community, and they don't know. And it's really hard to tell a politician that they might not know, right? And which is why we say it's going to be moral. Lots of people will say to me, and these politicians, in the fact that, oh no, recognition, if it was about recognition, I'm 100% there. That's all good. And I'm like, so why do you need something else? And my simple answer to them and to you and to anyone that asks is because First Nations people have said that this is how they want to be recognised. That's our ask, right? So that's what we're asking people to receive, that gift. Recognition is just good for all of us. We need it.
Fiona, can you explain why just recognition in a really, really stripped down version, which is just recognising a mere 60,000 years, explain why that wasn't enough through the Uluru process, why Mob was saying that's just not going to be enough?
Because it means no practical application on the ground that will change our lives. We're not doing this hard work, we're not doing it just to be recognised, because potentially that's just about maybe some ego or this or recognition, and I would say we have every right to, and not everyone would say that, but it's actually not about that. If we don't have something that's meaningful, what's the point of recognising a history that actually doesn't change anything for First Nations people? So it's why it has to have a practical change on the ground. And we've been trying to do that, and there's in ways. And I'm privileged to lead work in a region that I come from And not everyone has that privilege, and I do. I say I'm in the family business. It's not a butchery, it's Indigenous affairs, with that. And that's the whole point. It's at that local level, the funding and the responses to our complex challenges, we're saying to government, by doing this, giving us a voice in our say, we share responsibility. We share accountability. We can't do this alone, and I think that's the second part to it. I think it's really naive of political leaders to think, well, we can give something token because we can do that. Can you see there's still not that shared accountability, not that shared, it means we're doing something, but we're not reconciling the country. We have to have recognition to absolutely be able to have reconciliation. And I think those two parts are probably really key for me. And without both of them, there's no new foundation to set a way forward in how do we work together to make this country better than it already is.
Sujato, you end your essay. I really did enjoy reading this book. Make sure you get one with this. Hopefully you can remember your own essay. This wasn't meant, you say, and I thought it was really fascinating. If you think about what we might become as a nation were we to implement the Uluru Statement, aren't you just a little curious? I know I am. And I'm a journalist, so curiosity is key to my sort of DNA. Talk to me about that curiosity, for your imagination for what kind of country we should be.
Well, to think about it, I think all of the changes that's happened in my life, the incredible changes, the social, cultural, economic, political, all of those changes that have happened, what can we become? We have, I think over the last period of time, maybe 10, 20, 30 years, we have learned to be more and more afraid of what the future will bring through climate change, through many different things. And look, not unreasonably so. So one of the things that really struck me about this Uluru Statement from the Hub was that it gave us a framework where we could start to imagine that the future might be better, that we could actually do something meaningful now that's going to help us to build a better future tomorrow. And that could be in all kinds of ways. That particular thing came from a conversation that I had with Auntie Fran Dobson. Auntie Fran Dobson, yeah. Who I've done a number of events and so on. I met a few times in Sydney and so on. Amazing woman. Do you know Auntie Fran? Yeah. So amazing woman who's just spent a whole life devoted to learning, studying, disseminating knowledge. And she's quite elderly now. And she still has this incredible sparkle to her and this infectious enthusiasm to learn. And so that's really what I picked up from that. What can we learn? What can we learn about ourselves? And what can we learn to become? If you asked, if you want something more specific for myself, I can say, well, as a Buddhist and as a Buddhist practitioner, that feeling a more realistic and more meaningful sense of connection with place and with country is something that I've learned through my encounters with Indigenous people and their teachings. And that can be, through philosophy and so on, but also can be through just very simple practical things. Just give you a simple example. We were talking earlier about the meditation program, but the Didiri program you're running up in the north, amazing. And when I was in Perth, having a conversation with our local Indigenous elder, his name I can't remember now, and we're talking about meditation. He said that he would go off into the bush every so often, sit under a tree and just listen. And just listen to the spirits and the animals and the birds and the wind and just listen to what it said. And it's such a powerful process. So that's what I immediately went off and did that. It's great. So as a Buddhist meditator, that's a lesson that I got.
A lot of the framing around why we need a voice is around closing the gap. And obviously, everyone knows what I'm referring to here. Some appalling statistics we have in our country on life expectancy, education. I mean, it goes on and on. I know that I'm really striking forward, but I really want to do that. Fiona, I want to start with you on this. Let's just pretend, right, that in this amazing utopia, the gap's closed and that the voice has been successful. What would the ongoing need for the voice be?
We think about this every day. And I think it's important to know that because we're striving for that every day. So it's really interesting. We talk about this voice like it's a thing that's going to scare us, it's going to rock the country, and to do that. But if it does its job, you don't hear from it. So if we're looking at, if it's working at that local level, our communities, our First Nations leaders are coming together to solve our issues, our complexities. We're bringing to that table, we're asking government to partner with us, to put the investment in the areas that we've designed that will be the solutions for kind of our challenges. It means we're running them. There's jobs, there's sustainability, there's social development, economic development, family development. It happens. It means we create our own ecosystem because we can control and we have a say in some of these decisions. None of that plays out at the moment because we don't. It means our community, our families and our communities are really vibrant. And that doesn't mean we don't have challenges, but we're dealing with them. There's no more waste. We're actually putting into preventative to opportunity versus dealing with complexity. We're offering our children in our communities the same opportunity as every other Australian child, because that doesn't exist. That's the imbalance. And so when you think about that as a future, and when you think of that all children being born into this country in the future have the same opportunities, that's the country I want to live in.
Shireen, ATSIC. It was obviously, for those who are too young to remember, I was there the day it was abolished, was created through legislation and abolished, of course, through legislation. It represented Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. ATSIC has been sometimes referred to as a negative example of what it would look like to have a voice. How do you respond to that criticism that this would just be another ATSIC?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So firstly, it's important to understand that ATSIC was an institution set up only in legislation. So that's why it could be easily abolished. And it sort of demonstrates why Indigenous people are asking for a constitutionally guaranteed voice, constitutionally guaranteed Indigenous body, so that it has longevity, so that it is around even when governments change, and even if it gives advice that might not be too welcome, or even if it becomes an inconvenience, it will always be around. But the other thing that's important to know is that because the details are enacted through legislation, the design, the makeup, the processes and functions of the voice will always be able to evolve and improve over time. So it will be guaranteed in the Constitution, but it will always be able to evolve and improve. So in my view, ATSIC had strengths and weaknesses. What should have happened is those weaknesses should have been fixed up. Rules should have been changed, extra rigour and transparency should have been implemented. It shouldn't have been abolished, it should have been improved. And I think that's what we will have with a constitutionally guaranteed voice. I don't think anyone should expect it to be perfect off the bat, because we don't expect Parliament to be perfect. Politicians are not perfect, but when there's imperfect politicians in there, no one says, oh, well, let's get rid of Parliament. The problem must be Parliament. No, the problem is that human beings are imperfect, and therefore the institutions we create are imperfect, and they need to evolve and improve over time. But this is about a constitutional commitment to the principle that Indigenous people should always have a fair say when Parliament and government make laws and policies about them. So a principle of partnership, mutual respect, dialogue, that's what the referendum is about. But in terms of how this will be different to ATSIC, I think the government and experts and Indigenous leaders have been very clear, but that this is more about grassroots. This is more about empowering local and regional voices. So I think that came through very strongly in all the dialogues leading up to the Uluru Statement, was that they want this to be about local empowerment, not a top-down bureaucracy. But secondly, there's no intention for the body to be in charge of service delivery or funding. So there's two quite distinguishing features from the previous ATSIC model. But again, we should expect this to be an institution that learns and evolves and improves over time, but always anchored in that constitutional guarantee that comes with the blessing of the Australian people through, I hope, a successful referendum.
In a moment, I'm going to ask for your hands for questions, but just final question to Archbishop Peter. We just marked the 15-year anniversary to the apology to the stolen generations in the Parliament, and obviously that was a pretty significant apology, and you know, I cannot believe how many years have passed since as we remember that day and what that meant. But really, beyond the stolen generations, what we really have been reflecting on is many, many policies of injustice, which we agree, actually, across the political divide, were unjust. There's no contest over them. Back to the moral question, what is the moral obligation on us, those of us who are non-Indigenous, to right those wrongs of the past with a new approach?
I'll do what I did last time, and just
and answer a different
way.
question. He's a politician.
I actually answered my question. If we look at things that have happened in the past, both good and bad, but see them only as the level of their utility at the time, including, if I go back to your question that you asked to Rose, say we get the voice, the gap's no longer a gap, and all is good and wonderful. Do we keep having it? Yes. And things like the 15th anniversary of the apology. By the way, the 50th anniversary on Friday of the first Catholic Aboriginal Mass in Australia.
Really?
Yes, it happened here in Melbourne. So we're celebrating something coming up. Now, all of these things might be described in terms of utility. If we do that, and if we leave it at that, we've failed. Because this is not something simply about what might be good in this moment at this time, or what's not working at this moment in this time, and what might be due to resolve that as a solution of utility. Then we've missed the heart of a people who are of this land and who live as if the land itself is present for us. And if we lose that, then we've lost the point. I was really delighted to hear that there was a little bit of discussion about Dadiri, D-A-D-I-R-R-I. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, this is being brought from within the particular Aboriginal tradition of the people of Daly River and of Miriam Rose. I'm going to say her name incorrectly, I don't know how to pronounce it precisely, but Ungunmi, U-N-G-U-N-M-E-R-R. If I think I got the spelling right. Is that pronunciation close? Good. Fix me up later.
That's why we need a voice to give us pronouncers as well.
Yes, this is true.
Yep.
Miriam talks about, she says this, to know me is to breathe with me. And she talks about the deepness of silence and of listening. And we might use the voice in our particularly Western way as something that is imposed. I make my voice heard, imposing. But ought we not to be thinking about it as the voice to be listened to? And what is it to receive? That voice. And how we then live that out. Not in utilitarian ways, but in ways that are at the heart of what it is to be human in this context.
Thank you. You can clap. I know some people want to. Get your claps out. I thought that was, you got around to my question. Put your hands up. There's a hand over here. I know it's sort of in the crowd, but we can do that, I'm sure.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Hello. My name's Brian Keon-Cohen, and I'm intrigued by the last question and the Archbishop's answer, and I'd like to hear more answers. I came along tonight because the topic is the moral case for the Uluru Statement. And I anticipated that we might hear some exploration of what seems to me to be the crucial moral issue, and that is, as people living in this generation, what is our moral responsibility, quote unquote, if any, in respect of the appalling conduct of the British colonisers and in respect of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across the country. We all know the history. Read Henry Reynolds, for example. Frontier conflict, massacres. The last official police expedition was in the Northern Territory in 1926. We're talking living memory here when we think about stolen generations and intergenerational crisis. Victoria is leading the country in terms of the Europe Justice Commission, now conducting hearings into this appalling history within Victoria. Now I'm intrigued to hear, why have we heard no discussion at the political or more substantive level about a justification for the voice on a moral basis, i.e.
You mean from the political class, why aren't we hearing it?
Well, whoever. We, the current generation of the descendants of the colonialists who...
Well, those of us who are. This is the thing, the country is in three parts.
Yes, nice point. Who attempted to obliterate any Indigenous people who stood in the way of exploration, cattle industry, mining, whatever, and we benefited from all that. Do we have a moral obligation, therefore, to support the Uluru Statement?
Yeah.
I've not heard discussion about that point.
Okay. Well, I kind of alluded to it through historical injustices, which is the sort of premise of the whole thing, the colonial, brutal history. But Fiona, maybe you can take that one.
Could probably talk about that. I think the truth is, right, sorry, for those that don't know me, I can't pretend, I'll just say it.
No, come on, Fiona.
I think the truth is our country can't have those mature discussions. I think the truth is it's too confronting for some people that we hide, that it means we aren't part of the conversation, it becomes controversial, we don't want to do it. There's others that say that wasn't me, it's to do this. Like from a First Nations perspective, we have thought all of this, and there is a reason from our hearts that there's an order. Let's get a voice. Let's tell the truth of our country, and let's do treaty. Let's have new agreements as countries going forward. I think there's a real importance to the question that you were asked. That's why there is an order. First of all, we want recognition guaranteed through a voice in the Constitution, so that when we start to heal and tell the truth and to work through that we're not scared that we're going to pull out what that voice might mean. We're not scared that we're going to make it something that's being kicked around the can politically, that's happening through the debate now. And for half of you here, you would have no idea. But since kind of this has kicked off, personally, through the structural leadership role that I have, the correspondence is ugly that comes to me personally, that comes to my organisation. It's ugly that I don't let anyone else in my organisation see it anymore.
Can I put to you one of the most cutting lines in Noel Pearson's Boyer lectures, where he said, we are, a much unloved people, which I found very sad, but also found very accurate from my own lived experience in this country. And he talked about, for instance, he compared it to same-sex marriage and said the fact that many people knew same-sex couples, it was a different experience. How much does that worry you, the historical racism and the sort of stereotypes about Aboriginal people and the way that will play out in this debate?
The truth is, it's really heavy. And even sitting here, I have lots of emotion I'm masking. Because the reality of that is it's true. But we're just not allowing ourselves to sit there because we can't, because we don't want it for our children. We don't want it for the rest of the country. When you're only 3% of the country, imagine being in your big family and you're the unloved person. You're the one not included. You're the one talked about. Just everyone else is making your decisions for you. If you just bring it back personally, it carries trauma, right? And so we're hoping to rise above that, right? From that perspective, it's why we're having these conversations. 2 weeks ago, I was in Parliament House for 4 days, meeting with about 24 MPs of all different political fields. And I was with about 15 other First Nation leaders from across 10 regions of our country. It was the most suffocating 4 days of my life. I felt like I was sitting in front of people begging because I existed. That's the vulnerability of the truth to that question. Do we feel unloved? I do. Was it really hard to be in that institution for 4 days? You should have seen some of the things that were said to us. It was like I was begging somebody to care about me and my people. That's what we live every day. So there has to be a way forward, and there has to be, and we can't do that ourselves. It's why we're asking for leadership, for political leadership, for moral leadership, for just leadership of all members of our communities, is to say, even if you don't know, back that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know that something has to change in this country, and this is the way that we believe with all our heart that it's the best way to move forward. And let's figure out the rest together. All the conversations and debates about what it is and the detail, I want everyone to be that focused when we get to that point at legislation. Not now, because we don't have to have it sorted now. But when we get to that point at legislation, I want everyone from every political sphere being just as interested in it as they are now. Why? Because I want the best bloomin' voice that there could possibly be for my people.
Thank you. There's a question. Actually, there was one I picked up. Do you still want to ask the question? Just because I did see that you were the second to put your hand up, so I like to be very democratic.
That on? Okay. So we started to touch on that actually in your answer to the first question, because the kind of response that I'm most interested in is coming from the left. And, you know, Lydia Thorpe's been very vocal about this. And what you've said, I'm a New Zealander, I'm now an Australian citizen, but the framework that Te Tiriti Waitangi gives for these conversations is profoundly different. And, you know, you emphasised how small this ask is. And actually it is. There's not even a veto power. It's just basically don't send the bloody army in because someone tells you there's a child abuse problem, and then you're going to like put all this legislation in there and spend all this money on these white consultants and the white military and like militarize these First Nation communities. So maybe that wouldn't happen. Maybe this could help with a range of things. But in a way, it is a small ask. And that's what we're hearing from Lydia Thorpe, that this is, and other people coming from the left and people focusing on treaties, so challenging the order that you're proposing it. And so I guess I would just like to hear more from yourself, but other members of the panel as well, like how to respond to this push from kind of the other side of the spectrum, because I see when you've got both a national party, but a large portion, by the way, I'm in a Melbourne voter, Greens electorate. This is me and all my neighbours, right? And Lydia Thorpe has deeply unsettled this group of people, right, who see this ask as obviously a moral imperative, but like, can't we do better?
Okay, so let's frame it that way. Can't we do better?
I think history tells us we can't. We haven't been able to, right? So let's not pretend that we can. Can I say a couple of things quickly without trying to hog it?
Well, there's not even bipartisanship.
No.
If I can just give you what's happening on this proposal.
Yeah. So that's the difficulty, right? It's been called a modest ask. I think a few of us have said we think it's a small ask. We actually think it's not an ask of something we're going to do, but we're actually asking for others to listen, right? So it's not even that we're about to do something to the Australian people. But I think I alluded to it as well. As First Nations people, we've gone through a big process for this. So what I'd say around Lydia and sovereignty, there is not one First Nations person that would say that we've ceded our sovereignty. It is, I am Gogo Yalanji, no matter where I go and what I do, and it's not given up, and now I'm really strong in that. And that's really healing, because it's why I sit here and I'm being able to succeed and to do those things, because I'm so grounded in that. I think saying that we want something bigger and better and more, we knew would be unrealistic. We've asked for a really modest ask, recognition in the Constitution through a voice, and we are in political warfare. And we're sitting here having these conversations because we need all our soft yeses to be yeses. Otherwise, we're not going to win this referendum. That's the truth. That is the truth of where it is. We will have far rights, we'll have far left, we'll do that and to do it, which is why we're saying, actually, recognition in the Constitution guaranteed that it can't be pulled from us but can be legislated to make better. We've learnt so much since the ATSEC or the other days. We already know that heading into whatever this could be, it'll be the best that's ever been before us. But can we foresee the next 2-3 generations? Well, no, we want them to be able to have a say about what that means for them and how that could evolve. So for me, it's about, yes, it's modest, but it's actually the way. This is how our country is. No matter what it is, modest ask gets us here. When we're actually flat, and that's reconciliation to me, then we can be ambitious as a country. But we have to get here first. Otherwise, it's pie in the sky. We're going to be fighting. We're doing that. My real heartache and worry is what if we don't get to here?
Fiona, you just to add to that, this is 2 decades in the making to get to here.
And can I just...
A lot of reports have come before this, haven't they, Shireen?
Absolutely. And look, it is modest, but I would say, properly understood, it's modest yet profound. Like, this is a noble compromise. This is not a weak nothing preamble, merely symbolic recognition that would change nothing, right? Because that was rejected through the Uluru Statement. So let's be very clear about that. This is modest yet profound in that it would be a profound change to this relationship between the 3% Indigenous population of this country that currently has very little power when government makes top-down laws and policies about them. It would be a significant but subtle shift in that power dynamic, and I think that's really important because it's setting up this principle of partnership, this constitutional promise of ongoing dialogue. And just, so Lydia Thorpe was one of the delegates at the final Uluru Convention. So she was one of 7 out of 250 or so delegates who dissented. And I think it's important, it would be very weird if there was 100% consensus in the Indigenous community. It would be
very strange.
I would be sitting here thinking there was something very strange going on. But 250 minus 7 is something like a 97% consensus. And that is a consensus in this extraordinarily diverse Indigenous community with north-south divides, with urban, regional, remote divides, with political divides, with cultural, linguistic divides, with some pretty big personality divides. Yet they achieved a 97% consensus on this very complex question of how do you want to be constitutionally recognised, and I think that deserves to be respected. That majority national consensus, as Fiona said, the first ever national majority consensus that Indigenous people in this country have ever produced. I think, yes, it's natural there's disagreement, but I think we should respect that.
I'm going to take a final question, of course, from over here before we conclude.
Hi, my name is Todd Fernando. Noel Pearson said recently on 7:30 that he has pursued a middle path between the original Australians and the new Australians. He then went on to say that if the advocacy of that pathway fails, well, then a whole generation of leadership, particularly Aboriginal leadership, will have failed because we will have advocated coming together in partnership with government, and that would have made an invitation to the Australian people that would have been repudiated. Do you think that a no result, would result in severe civil unrest?
It's a really interesting question. I'd not ever contemplated it.
Thanks. I'll just take that very briefly. Do I think a no vote would result in severe civil unrest? No. It would result in some civil unrest, and it certainly wouldn't increase harmony coming in the future. It wouldn't result in severe civil unrest because most Australians are fat and happy. And that's the reality. We might go on a protest, we might sign a petition, but we would get on with our lives and we'd forget about it soon enough. And that's the reality of Australia as a nation, whether you like it or not. And that, to me, is one of the reasons why the choice which faces us at this point is we take a modest step or we take no step at all.
It's a conversation. So I have 6 kids, 4 to 23, and the hardest conversations are with my children. And it is, if this doesn't work, do you have a job? Are you going to keep doing what you say you love? I don't know how to answer that, is the truth. It's that same, I think, honest vulnerability that Noel shares in that, right? Which is, that is what we're thinking. What does it mean? I happen to be the CEO of Cape York Partnership, a really large empowerment Indigenous organisation. If the country sends me a message, if politicians say that they don't want to set a new foundation in partnership in order to go forward, Structurally, like any leader of any organisation, I have to rethink my strategy. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm already not wanting to contemplate it because it's not a place I want to be. And I don't think it's being pie in the sky, but for my soul, I can't think about that right now, but I may have to.
So can I just pick up on what Fiona just said then and really just challenge and ask everybody here today, we have to take responsibility here. Like, we can't just sit back and think to ourselves, oh, will this fail? We have to do everything possible to ensure this succeeds. And I really think this can't just be the job of Indigenous people, who are only 3% of the population. We all bear responsibility for the success or failure of this referendum. We really do. Because at the end of the day, it's us voting. It's all of us voting. So I truly think we have a moral responsibility to have these difficult, persuasive conversations with our friends, colleagues, families, everyone, because it would be a tragedy, I think, for the entire country.
Shireen, what would that look like for the country, do you think?
What?
A no vote?
I think it would be a tragedy. It would. And we need to do everything possible to ensure success. And I would ask us all to step up. Those of us who want to see this succeed, don't sit back and think it will succeed, it'll be fine. It will only succeed if each of us does everything possible to help it succeed. And I truly think if we stand in solidarity with what the majority of Indigenous people are asking for here, if we truly stand in solidarity and we do the work, we do the hard work, it will succeed.
Can I ask one thing that we might all do? Find on your computer when you get home the framing of the Uluru Statement from the heart. You know what I'm talking about? So there's the statement in the middle, the painting around it that was done by one of the communities there present in preparation, and all the signatures. Spend half an hour or an hour, read every signature. Read the name. Say the name. That's what this is about.
Thank you so much to the panel, and I will now hand back over.
Thank you. I'd just like to, and I can't adequately sum up, so I'm going to just read something that Damien Freeman wrote in the concluding chapter of the book. The chapter is called Conclusion, This Whispering in the Bottom of Our Hearts. And Damien writes, the Uluru Statement from the heart calls for a written obligation in the Australian Constitution, an obligation imposed on the Parliament and the government to hear Indigenous people's voices when political decisions are made about them. Statements from the soul demonstrates that Australia's faith communities understand that the moral imperative to answer this call is anchored in the obligations written in the heart. I think what we've heard today is just a wonderful discussion that addresses a number of those topics, and the questions, and thank you for those that came from the audience, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to more of you. This discussion, this conversation could have gone on for hours. Thank you for coming this evening, and please join me again in thanking Sujato, Fiona, Shireen, Archbishop Peter, and our wonderful moderator, PK. Thank you all.